We're back with another campaign breakdown, and up next we have, in my opinion, the worst campaign in Left 4 Dead 2. Crash Course is about as bad as it gets from a gameplay perspective. It's only 2 chapters long, and those 2 chapters are about as boring as it gets. With the exception of the howitzer found in Chapter 1, this campaign does nothing interesting. If I had to give this campaign any sort of credit, the wall graffiti and dialogue interactions are among the best in Left 4 Dead 1. Without wasting any more time, let's break down the story behind Crash Course. Very shortly after the events of No Mercy, the survivors crash at a nearby city. After checking the wiki, this city is named Whitney County, which is a real city found in Pennsylvania. At the start of the campaign, you'll sometimes get this back and forth between the survivors.
I still can't believe you shot the pilot.
He turned into a zombie, Francis. He wasn't gonna land the thing.
Not only does this mirror the beginning of Swamp Fever almost to a T, it should also be noted that of all the people in that helicopter, Zoe was the one to pull the trigger. Not the biker, not the war vet, Zoe, the youngest of the 4 survivors. And if you're extra lucky, Zoe will sometimes say this at the start of the campaign.
Pilot's license revoked. Wah!
Zoe shooting the pilot becomes a running joke in this campaign, and Francis is sure to bring it up whenever he gets the chance.
How many pilots have you shot, Zoe? Rough ballpark guess.
Francis and Lewis will also have this exchange.
Hey, Lewis, that fancy college of yours teach you how to fix a helicopter?
That's funny, Francis. Why don't you take your mustache, your little vest, and your chaps and go find yourself a parade?
Another thing that should be noted before moving on is the name of this campaign. Crash Course, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, is a series of lessons that teach you a lot of basic facts or skills in a very short amount of time. A very fitting name, considering that Crash Course, as mentioned earlier, is the shortest campaign in the Left 4 Dead series. And after digging through the wiki, it turns out that this was an intentional design choice. Valve thought the shorter levels would result in a more intense game of versus, which is, kind of funny, because even all the way back then, not a lot of people were playing this campaign. But that's enough slander for now, let's get back on track. One thing that I noticed while walking through this campaign is the sheer amount of dead soldiers and abandoned military vehicles. You see these throughout Left 4 Dead's story, sure, but it's noticeably cranked up in Crash Course. This could be related to the military outposts found later on, or it was simply a failed evacuation which resulted in the deaths of military personnel. We'll talk more about the military outposts with the howitzer very soon, but for now, let's keep talking about Chapter 1. Shortly after leaving the crash site, the survivors cut through a warehouse, and if you walk into a room on the left, you find a room with some wall graffiti that reads as follows. The army left a howitzer behind. The alleys are safer. No, they aren't. 5 of my buddies died back here today. Angels of death. Brenda, Jerry, Chris, Phil, Sean, Brock, Jason. World's coming to an end and they're drawing pictures. And for those wondering, the tally marks add up to a grand total of 660. The name Sean makes an appearance in the Last Stand campaign as well. His graffiti reads as follows. I am the last one here. Thank you to those who got me this far. Sean. Neat Easter egg, but remember that the Last Stand is not canon. After cutting through the warehouse, if you look at the side of the building, you'll see the name Hirsch Shipping, and sometimes you'll get this line from Francis.
I drove for Hirsch once, till some guy laughed at my little brown shorts, and I beat him to death.
This also isn't the first time the survivors cut through a warehouse belonging to Hirsch. In Chapter 3 of No Mercy, a warehouse can be found with the exact same company name. Now, moving on. Shortly after, the survivors come across a barricade. Considering the sandbags, the spotlights, and the writing on the doors, it's safe to assume that this barricade was set up by the military. And when you eventually reach the other side, you find more military vehicles, more dead soldiers, and a working howitzer. On the right of the barricade, you can find a piece of paper listing off the locations of CETA evacuation centers. Half the page is torn, but thankfully, this same piece of paper can be found on the wall undamaged in Chapter 2. And we will break this down in due time. But for now, let's talk about the howitzer. Aside from the finale, this is the only other event in this campaign, and here comes the obvious question. Why bring a howitzer to this outpost? Considering that the howitzer is already loaded and aimed towards the bridge, my best guess is that the military brought the howitzer to strengthen the defense of their outposts. At this stage of the outbreak, the military was likely aware of the special infected, and had to take more extreme measures to bolster their defenses. A howitzer shell does sound like an effective weapon against something like a tank, but keep in mind that's just speculation. Before moving on, it should also be noted that right above this outpost is a destroyed train, and sometimes you'll get this back and forth between Francis and Zoe.
Whoa! Zoe must have shot the train conductor.
Okay, you know what? He was a zombie. Zombie, zombie, zombie. Not a pilot. He was a zombie, Francis.
Right next to the howitzer, you can find a building with a for lease sign, and sometimes you get this dialogue between Francis and Lewis.
For lease.
I'll be damned, Francis. When'd you learn to read?
Also, when you fire the howitzer, sometimes Francis will say this.
Here they come! Zoe! Just pretend they're all helicopter pilots!
Zombie, Francis. He was a zombie!
After walking up the bridge, the survivors see a highway sign saying Riverside, and once you reach the safe room, you'll sometimes get this back and forth between Zoe and Francis.
Riverside? I hate Canada. If there's one thing I hate more than vampires, it's Canada, eh?
Canada? Francis, we're in Pennsylvania.
Man, I've been hating Riverside all this time for nothing.
Yeah, Canadians are dicks.
And sometimes Francis will say this after he hears a boomer or a hunter.
I hear a boomer! And it sounded Canadian. Hunter! It looked Canadian.
Now, moving past the unnecessary Canada slander, let's move on to Chapter 2. We have some more wall graffiti to break down, but there's something that we have to talk about first. On the wall behind a table, you find a map, similar to the one found in Chapter 1 of Dead Center, showing the locations of military outposts. Most of these outposts have an X written on them except for two, the Northeastern Safety Zone and the South Safety Zone. The South Safety Zone is of course located in New Orleans. As for the Northeastern Safety Zone, I'm almost positive that this is Fort Millhaven. At this point in the story, Fort Millhaven is still active and taking in survivors, not to mention it's consistent with the location of Blood Harvest. Before moving on, there's another thing that should be noted. The X's on this map may not be 100% accurate because if you look at the bottom right, you find another safety zone located in Georgia with an X over it. I'm almost positive that this safety zone is the Vanna Hotel seen in the beginning of Dead Center. Dead Center does take place in Georgia, and the Vanna Hotel was used by the military as an evacuation center. But if this is true, why is it scratched out? At this point in the story, the Vanna Hotel should be fine. This is another point where I don't have a 100% confident answer. The X seems to suggest that the events of Dead Center already happened, and the Vanna Hotel is overrun, but at this point in the story, the Left 4 Dead 2 survivors haven't even met yet. I might do a future video talking about the timeline because once again, I'm about to jump into a massive rabbit hole and I don't want to go off track. Overall point is, I don't think this map is 100% accurate, but it's important to note that these green circles are consistent with the locations of Dead Center, the Parish, and the Sacrifice comic. On the right of the map, we have another piece of paper left by Sita. This is the piece of paper I showed earlier, but this time we can see the bottom half of the page. Now we can see the names of these locations. From top to bottom, we have Mercy Hospital, Fairfield Arena, Borden High School, and Riverside First Church. And yes, I'm almost positive that this is the same church seen in Death Toll. If you look at the map, the church can be found all the way to the left, and at the top of the map you can see the name Riverside, which is of course the location of the Death Toll campaign. Also, if you look at this map, you may have noticed that the church and Mercy Hospital are surprisingly close together. Based on this, it's safe to assume that the survivors didn't get very far in the helicopter, further implying that the pilot turned very fast after picking up the survivors. Now, with all that out of the way, let's break down some wall graffiti. Peter, Army's still in Riverside, waiting for you at the depot. We finished the truck. Hurry. Karen and I are holed up in a recycling plant, have plenty of food and water. Look for the hollow container. I love you. Jason. P.S. Don't tell Allison. Jonathan, you have touched my very being. I shall remember you. You taught all that knew you what courage meant and have... Okay, seriously, what the fuck is this sentence? I shall remember you. You taught all that knew you what courage meant and have shown us an example in death as you did in life. God give me strength in my life without you, and I shall thank her. I can only hope that our souls shall entwine again in a place where there is only love. No tears, no sadness, no cruelty, no white, no black, no zombies, no hate, no war. Only love, Allison. P.S. I'm fat. Go back to poetry school. Jesus, lady, I'm hiding from zombies and reading this was the most terrible thing to happen to me today. Allison, roses are red, violets are blue, you suck. Allison, reading your poem ruined heaven. Thanks a lot. Jonathan's ghost. In Chapter 2, before you reach the depot, the survivors will walk past a billboard, and sometimes you'll get this dialogue between the survivors.
Funny, sexy brunette zombie killer wanted to lead 3 helpless men to safety. Huh.
This sign says, I hate Mondays. Man, tell me about it.
The truck referenced in the wall graffiti earlier can be found in the finale of Crash Course. Before talking about this finale from a gameplay perspective, we have a few things to break down. First of all, this truck, along with the art design on the front, is likely a reference to Dawn of the Dead, which also features an armored vehicle with a similar design. And if you look behind the truck, you find 2 dead bodies, one with a radio. No way to know for sure, but these were likely the survivors mentioned in the wall graffiti in Chapter 2. The truck they were working on is still here, and more importantly, it works. Either the survivors died or fled the depot, but regardless of the reason, the truck was left behind for the survivors to take. But first they need to power the generator to lower the truck. This finale sucks, and I have almost nothing good to say about it. The generator turning off is clearly foreshadowing the finale of the sacrifice, so I guess there's that, but from a gameplay perspective, this finale does pretty much nothing interesting. After the truck lowers, the survivors pile in and head straight for Riverside, and that concludes the story behind Crash Course. As I mentioned earlier, this is the worst campaign in my opinion, but on the lore side, it's pretty good, considering it's only 2 chapters long. Up next we have Death Toll, and after that we only have 2 campaigns to go. If I missed anything, be sure to let me know down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one.